Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. You know what one of the coolest jobs on set for a Star Wars film is? Probably working with ILM's miniatures department. They're responsible for a lot of the practical effects we've seen in recent Star Wars TV shows. For instance, in the Skeleton Crew, a lot of people have been marveling over the awesome blend of special effects layered onto practical effects. This is why the aliens in this show so far have looked phenomenal. It's really a perfect blend of physical craftsmanship and technology. I feel like it took them a while to kind of nail this look, but they finally figured it out. And they've actually used the same technique to bring the main ship in the series, the Onyx Cinder, to life. What we're seeing on screen is actually an extremely expensive and highly detailed miniature of this vessel that has working servo-operated engines and lights. It's basically a model toy enthusiast's dream. And this is really fitting because in a lot of ways, George Lucas was one of the pioneers of using miniatures to create realistic space scenes. While in the past, the use of miniatures was designed to take people to fantastical worlds and otherwise difficult to recreate scenes, the models of today are designed to visually ground audiences and give them something solid to look at. So not everything looks like CGI. This is important in today's film industry where not only is a lot of stuff computer generated, you even have AI generated visuals, kind of like this avatar I'm using right now on screen. Every good Star Wars story has a ship with its own unique characteristics and features. In the best tales, these vessels are more than just a mode of transportation, they also serve as the crew's home. Sometimes it's the only place where the characters can feel safe while on their adventure. Now, when I first saw the Onyx Cinder in teaser trailers, I thought we were looking at some kind of variant of the U-Wing, maybe an Incom Corporation type ship. But in the first episode, when Wim discovers the ship buried beneath all that dirt, it becomes quickly apparent that this is no U-Wing. It's a lot larger. At 55 meters in length, 40 meters in width, and 13.5 meters in height, or around 4 stories, this is more of a freighter, bigger than the Millennium Falcon and shorter and wider than the Gazanti-class cruiser. And this makes a lot of sense because I feel like freighters are really the ideal type of ships for pirates like Tak Renard to use. And that's because freighters are really the largest type of vessel that a criminal like him could easily get his hands on. You know, the sails of gunships, corvettes, and frigates are tightly controlled by the central government, whoever is in power, and it's kind of hard to get your hands on one of these things unless you steal one. I mean, it is possible, but it's not easy. Freighters also have an ample amount of storage space on board, so if you have a lot of treasure that you've stolen or raided from some world, you can store it there, along with munitions and extra crew members. Remember, a lot of these pirate ships are designed for boarding operations, and those are very costly. You're going to want to have extra hands on board. A lot of freighters are also designed to be very modular. They have powerful stock engines, and then everything else on board is interchangeable, so pirates can modify these civilian ships into some very formidable warships. Also, if you like to smuggle, you can create false walls and take advantage of the maintenance ducts to store illicit goods or people, like Han Solo did with the Millennium Falcon. Not all pirate ships are designed for the same reason. Something much larger, like that multi-story frigate first captained by Silvo in the first episode of the Skeleton Crew, is very much a flagship type of vessel. Usually, when you have a frigate-sized pirate ship, it is going to be at the head of a pirate flotilla. It might even be a pirate king or queen operating that thing. At 185 meters in width and 237 meters in height, this pirate frigate was absolutely massive. It also had tons of turbo laser batteries on board and even a hangar bay for extravehicular activities and a fighter contingent. These larger pirate frigates were designed primarily for halting and boarding merchant vessels. The sheer size of the vessel along with the firepower on board usually made these skirmishes very one-sided. And as we see with Silva, these types of larger pirate ships require a constant source of booty and victims to keep the crew fed and happy. These larger ships are quite rare because of the sheer amount of resources you need to sustain them, and if you are able to get those resources, that means you're committing a lot of crime. You're raiding a lot of worlds, you're capturing a lot of ships, and while the New Republic is willing to turn its head away from some minor infractions, a large frigate flying around taking over dozens of ships is going to elicit some kind of response, and that is never good for the pirates. The Onyx Cinder is clearly built for a different type of pirate adventure. This vessel is relatively sleek. It kind of has to be for people to compare it to something Incom would make. And it's not the most heavily armed either. It has 2 laser cannon turrets that we know of so far, very similar to the Millennium Falcon's configuration. These were mostly defensive in purpose and designed as point defense weapons. Although I'm almost 100% sure there are other weapons on board of the Onyx Cinder. That loading crane arm that Wim is playing on looks kind of menacing. And if you take a look at the surface of the ship, you can see other weapons and placements, including like forward-facing lasers and stuff like that. Now, in the captain's log, there is a mention of this ship being up-armored.
I have the ship, clad in armor and ready, but my crew still doubts Atten is real.
And clearly the ship's original superstructure was reinforced as well. I mean, how else do you think the Onyx Cinder survived a crash landing so intense that it got buried several feet below the ground? Now, in starships do crash a lot, and they're pretty robust. I mean, Anakin Skywalker was an expert at doing this, but most of the time, while these ships will keep the people inside safe, are going to be inoperable for quite some time. The Onyx Cinder, on the other hand, was ready to go right away. All these kids really needed to do was to restart the reactor and then push a button, and it was flight-worthy. Even if every time they jump in hyperspace, they leave behind a cloud of debris, this is very impressive. Another very interesting thing I noticed about this starship is that the 6 main thrusters, most likely some kind of ion turbine engine, are mounted on a swivel, giving the ship vertical takeoff capabilities. First, again, it's very impressive that none of these engines and the mounts they're placed on were damaged during the crash. I mean, those are some moving parts. But more importantly, most starships use repulsor lifts for in-atmosphere flights. It's basically an anti-gravity technology that only works within the gravity well of planets. It's really an effortless way to fly into space by negating the effects of gravity. You don't actually need to hit escape velocity at all. And so you just gently glide until your repulsor lift stops working. It's usually a distance thing. Once you get too far from the gravity source, you can no longer push away from it, at which point you turn on the sublight engines, and it's like any other starship. This is how massive ships like the Star Destroyer and Super Star Destroyer are able to land in atmosphere and then take off again with relative ease. But it seems like the Onyx Cinder uses these thrusters to maximum effect when lifting off of the ground, which is not something we usually see. This is why you have the swivel-mounted engine, something that we usually only see on VTOL aircraft like the F-35. It is possible that the Onyx Cinder was created before repulsor lift technology was used to basically lift starships, so maybe that is why it's using this older method, not older, but just this method of propulsion. This could also be why the ship's superstructure is so reinforced. The stress from air resistance and gravity on the frame with this type of acceleration is much more intense than using anti-gravity technology. But then again, this could also be personal preference. Remember, repulsor lifts have one major disadvantage, and that is their top speed in atmosphere. They are limited by a lot of things, and generally everything from like a large Star Destroyer to an X-Wing tops out at around 700 to 800 miles per hour, or the speed of sound. I think it could be really advantageous for you to launch your ion turbine engines while in atmosphere because it gives you a boost of speed that is simply not easy to match with the repulsor lift. The Onyx Cinder wouldn't be the first vessel to use this strategy to keep itself ahead of its enemies. Top Techno Union execs often use the Hardcell class interstellar transport, and these starships actually were powered by 6 individual rocket boosters, which made them extremely fast as well, and also gave them the ability to outrun her enemies in the corporate world. Either way, it's a really cool little detail about this ship. And I love seeing the engine set some trees on fire while taking off during that whole unburying itself scene. It was epic. It actually reminds me a lot of the Amblin Entertainment film E.T. at the end when the alien ship lands in the forest. Also, the configuration of these engines, especially on the rear wing, reminds me a lot of the Sea Rock configured Gazanti-class cruiser with its extra engines on board. Maybe there's a lineage here. I wouldn't be surprised if the Onyx Cinder began its life as a Krillian Engineering Corporation freighter. I mean, most ships seem to have some kind of connection to this company. And as far as control surfaces and extra thrusters, well, the Onyx Cinder has a lot of them.
It's simple. Primary acceleration, pitch, yaw, roll, trim control, secondary acceleration, rear thrusters, side thrusters, base thrusters, secondary base thrusters, tertiary thrusters, rear shield, front shield, and finally, flaps.
This could be for zero-G docking procedures, or it could be that the Onyx Cinder uses orbital mechanics to fly around, which would be kind of interesting because not a lot of ships follow the rules of physics in this regard. The mention of flaps also seems to indicate that there's like an air brake on this thing, which means that there's a lot of signs pointing to the fact that this ship doesn't have anti-gravity technology, and then they're just using these other options to successfully fly through space and through atmosphere.
What does this one do?
No! That's the emergency hull demolition sequencer. You fool. Never, ever, ever touch that.
And so this is actually a feature on a lot of military ships in the Star Wars galaxy, especially Imperial military ships. For instance, Imperial-class Star Destroyer captains were actually trained to destroy their own ships in situations when the onboard security forces lose control to boarders. In more extreme situations, the captain can tell everyone to abandon ship and then seal himself in the bridge and turn that ship into a star or a planetary mass of some kind. The second method involves the captain still having control over the engineering deck and issuing an order to overload the ship's reactor. Then we have the self-destruct option, and this requires the top 3 ranking members of the crew to basically use their own personal password to initiate this sequence. This last method is not always possible, but is ideal because it gives the crew time to escape. Now imagine that pirate legend Tag Renard not only used this feature to deter boarders, it was also a hedge against his own crew who could, carry out a mutiny at any time. This way he can just seal himself inside the ship and threaten to blow everyone else up. The bridge is pretty simple in its layout, a bit less cramped than the Millennium Falcon. There's much more than a co-pilot and pilot seat here. You also have a navigation system for inputting hyperspace coordinates, and I think opposite of that is the weapons console. If you take a look at the exterior of the ship, there are a lot of random gun emplacements on this vessel that have to be controlled somewhere. The bridge itself is actually not centered or at the front of the vessel, and it's actually tucked in on the port side of the ship, a little bit behind the nose. This type of offset cockpit is not very common, but it is found on other ships like Han Solo's YT-1300 freighter, which started out life as a tugboat, and so you need that visibility from the side to operate. We don't really know why the cockpit is on the side, but I know why Captain Renard chose this ship. It's good to have your cockpit kind of hidden. It's good that people don't know where it is unless they're familiar with the ship. It just gives you higher chances of surviving any type of battle. And the location of that bridge is also very well covered by the point defense weapons on board. The rest of the ship is actually pretty spacious, and this ship can easily accommodate a crew of a few dozen people. We have a series of bunk beds right next to the cockpit as well, kind of like the crew rest area when you have to constantly switch flight crews for longer trips. There's also a small mess area in this part of the ship, and it's attached to the captain's quarter, which can give you a nice view of what's chasing you, or maybe a glimpse of the hyperspace tunnel you're going through. Although legends say that if you stare too long at a hyperspace tunnel, you will lose your mind, something about demons in the Immaterium. Not exactly practical to have a viewport so large in that location, but this is clearly designed to replicate the captain's quarter on a galleon or some other larger pirate vessel, which is usually at the stern of a ship. I really appreciate little details like this. So something I kind of learned about the ship design I want to point out for you guys that I think is really cool. So this is the bridge of the vessel, right? We're facing forward this way. You have your seats. And then this is the crew quarter right behind it. You have your bunk bed here and here. Dining room table, right? Sorry about the lack of art. And then you have the rear captain's quarter here with the big windows. So what we're looking at here, this is an independent module from the rest of the ship, right? This is the larger ship. It's like this. This is the front. This is the back. This module has access to the exterior through this hatch here on the port side. You can go in and out pretty quickly. And then to get to the rest of the ship, there's just this hallway. And this is an area of control. Once you control this, you can basically cut yourself off from the entire ship. And I think this is designed this way so that the captain can put all of his most loyal crew members in this area, maybe 4 or 5 people, like the helmsman, some security guys. And then if there is a mutiny, you can just cut everything off. And this is really just the perfect design for someone who doesn't trust his crew. I like this design feature a lot. It's kind of cool. I can almost actually see the bridge module being completely off limits because these type of pirate ships are going to have, different levels of crew members, including like newly picked up scum that you definitely would not want to trust in more sensitive areas of the vessel. Take a look at the front of this ship where you usually have the cockpit. It's just a solid hunk of metal, very robust and intimidating, good for blasting through things. It almost reminds me of those old Dreadnought class heavy cruisers. We have 2 defense turrets that are manned by actual gunners on the top of the vessel. They are reached through a retracting seat. It's a really cool design. From what I can see, there are actually no point defense weapons on the bottom or the belly of this ship, which its potential weak spot you can attack. Below the ship, we have the landing bay and the ramp itself, which reminds me more of a traditional looking starship, like something you would see in the Alien series or even Starfield, actually. All in all, I really like the design of this ship. I mean, if you take the time to really break apart the scenes, you can see a lot of little design features that the creators of this vessel thought about, and I appreciate those kind of little details. But at the end of the day, this is a very classic Star Wars vessel, right? It is a pretty ruthless and potent ship that kind of looks like a clunker from the outside. It's a sleeper vessel, just like the Millennium Falcon is. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed our assessment of this starship. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.